The study, even though we've been focused on contentment and joy in some regard over the past several weeks, um, previous to this study, which I think was about 2 years, 3 years ago, we studied what is grace. That's what we took a look at is grace and understanding it more than God's riches at Christ's expense and the cute little applications and terminology and church phrases that we use in the church building. And then that ushered us into this study, which is okay, so now that you understand grace, let's take a look at grace in action being and grace displayed. And then let's also juxtapose that subtitled by anything he can do, I can do better. And that's where we're going to jump to in just a second after we review our key passage here, which is going to be 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. So let's read that, and then let's take you through a different kind of discussion today to help you understand how awry applying Jesus's grace can sometimes be and how difficult it is for us to stay with the plan. Okay? So to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses. I delight in insults. I delight in hardships. I delight in persecutions. I delight in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So let me present to you some scenarios. We can talk through them a little bit so you can see this maybe differently from this Paul guy that you're maybe getting sick of. This Paul stuff, you just get sick of hearing this over and over again. He's just too goody two-shoe a Christian for you to get your head around. So I want to talk about some of the Bible figures. I want to mention a few. Let's see where we get to today. And talk about potentially the circumstance, what should have been the just consequence, and then the grace that gets involved. So Abraham, I think you guys all know Abraham. He's the patriarch of the Jews, if not actually the patriarch of the Christians. In Genesis 16, 1 through 15, we're getting Abraham mating with Sarai's handmaiden, Hagar. Now that occurs after what? Anybody remember why it would be that Abraham indulges in this way?
He thinks he needs to move along God's plan.
Well, and his wife kind of encouraged him.
Okay, and what's the plan?
There has to be a chosen son, and it ain't happening. And there's a sense that Yahweh is somehow not up to the task or is letting them down, and so he obviously needs some help. Anything he can do, I can do better. So I'll help with that a little bit, and just maybe, because this is a cultural thing that we're used to, maybe this is what he is planning to do. Not, but this is the way we try to help.
Okay. So would you describe Abraham as being content with God's speaking over his life?
Is that to me personally or the group?
That's the group.
Well, if he was content, he wouldn't be trying to do something to push it along. He would have had more faith or more trust that God had it under control.
Okay, hang on a second. Are we saying that there's a facet of contentment that's tied to our faith? Really?
Well, maybe. Yeah. I mean, if he had been content, even though Sarai had said, here's my handmaiden, he would have said, no, God has this. But kind of Regine, where you were going. He said, whatever God can do, let's try to help it along a little bit. And we're all guilty of that sometimes, right? Let's try to help this along.
But I bet you if you'd asked Abraham, he would have said, yeah.
Say that again, Jerry.
I bet if you would have asked Abraham, he would have said if he was content, he would have said, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I like that. I think outwardly and in a social sense, Abraham probably would have said yes, because what's funny? It's neat that you'd say that, Jerry. Abraham, in this position that he's in, when God speaks over his life this way, he's not been chastened. He's not been chastised in the way that Paul is later when we're reading about Paul. He's actually, if anything, been rewarded, and he's being promised rewards. And those things are to come more so than Paul's situation, where he's kind of being limited because of the surpassingly great revelations and relationship that he has with the Lord Jesus. So Abraham is in a really good way. Abraham's not dealing with difficulties and hardships and insults. If anything, he's got maybe one limitation at this point, which is why he wants to help along. And what's that limitation that he has? Anybody?
No offspring.
Say again?
No offspring.
Okay, but what's his limitations there?
Oh, Sarah.
Really
Which
old.
is what? Say that. I heard that O word. Say it.
It's the wife's fault.
Yeah, they're old people. Abraham can still do the do, but his wife ain't up to the task. Right?
Oh my.
Okay, good. Join me on this, folks, because sometimes we need to see this situation as people and get the funny out of it, and then watch us just muck things up. Because Abraham and Sarah talked this bad boy over. They trust in Yahweh God. Good things are happening for them. They're becoming wealthy. They are as being released from, say, Egypt. They're gaining new wealth. They're gaining a huge community in a place that's not theirs. And God speaks over their life and says, this is going to even get better. And Sarah goes, I like it, but I'm not really sure that it's happening in the way that it should happen. So I got an idea for you. And we talked about this, and this won't be the discussion we have, but it's an idea that Abraham doesn't push back too hard on. And I like that Jerry says, if you would talk to Abraham about his contentment and his joy, he would say, I'm content. But the action very clearly says he's not. The course of events that occur that Abraham and his wife indulge in clearly suggest, if not clearly show, they are not content in their weaknesses, in their difficulties, in their hardships, which is maybe what this is, more than some of the other situations. So like Sarah had said, they decide to help the Lord along a little bit. So when I look at that and I see Yahweh God speaking over Abraham and Sarah's life, essentially, and then them saying, well, we got a better idea to help make this whole thing occur. The just outcome, when I study this, the just outcome, at the very least, should be that Abraham only gets the one son because he doesn't trust Yahweh God. Any comments there? Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Brother Red Shirt. By the way, the red shirts always are the guys that get killed. Okay, thank you, folks.
In the original series. In the original series.
The only one. Sorry. Edit that, please, Sarah. Okay, I'm sorry, Brother Red Shirt, what were you saying?
I'm back. So what do you mean by the just result?
what he deserves for his actions. The minimum.
But you're putting your human perspective on that. You know, saying, yeah, and I mean, it's probably a good thing that you don't have that smite button available.
Well, yeah, and I'm not talking about Jesus, because we're going to get into situations where a lot of smiting can occur. So, and I'm not talking about from a divine situation. I'm talking about the simplest consequence of the action, the simplest outcome. That would be just.
Well, sorry, Gene. Yeah.
If you compare this to the woman taken in adultery that's brought before Jesus, shouldn't the just result be she dies and so does Abraham?
No, because you're going. There was right now. You're thinking about it from a divine standpoint, and so I'm not looking at God's perspective, because all of these situations could involve smiting. I'm talking about the very simple consequence that they defy the divine speaking over in their lives, and then what's the outcome? The simplest outcome. Not the one where God blows people up, because we'll read some of these and there should be a lot of blowing up going on.
Okay, I'm going to abstain then, because I'm not getting what you're talking about. Because it sounds like to me that, and maybe I just understand what happened too well, and so I'm still stuck with the outcome that we know. So I'm going to shut up.
So am I hearing you right, Preston? I mean, yes, are you making a point that God would have said, okay, fine, you want to do it that way, that's what you're going to live with? Is that where you're heading?
Yeah, I'm kind of saying that if the Lord didn't smite these people, and if he wasn't going to, you'll have to look this up, Romans 8:28, if he was, right? So you have books, so look for Romans 8:28, because that might go in conjunction to help you understand this. So he's not going to smite folks, but he's going to let them exist with the consequences only of their actions. So
he could have said, fine, if that's what you want the heir to be, then there you go. So it would be the God of Abraham, Ishmael, and who knows who. Correct. Right. So somebody, I just said Romans 8:28. What is that? Does anybody have that on hand? Is it in the book? What's it say? Somebody read it if you have it.
It says God is not surprised.
Huh.
And and he's going to make all the stuff that we do wrong work out for his glory.
Okay. So that it works out for his glory is because he's God, right? But that we're involved in it, maybe this will help a little bit. That we're involved in it is his grace toward us.
We have to also remember to read 28 with 29.
Yes, sir, you're correct. But 8:28 is a good start. So let me read these juxtaposed, and then when we move to the next guy, that may help give you some comfort in the thinking here, Gene, because I'm looking at your face and you're going, I'm a red shirt guy in more than one ways right now. Just phaser me. Just phaser me out of existence. So the just situation, the deserved consequence, is that Abraham only gets the one son because he doesn't trust Yahweh, right? But the graceful situation, what Yahweh does instead, is Abraham and wife still have a son who inherits his birthright, legacy, and promise. Instead of what I previously said, that's what Yahweh brings about in spite of. Let's go to the next guy. That may help your with the fluidity of thinking and experience. Yaakov, or Jacob. In Genesis 25, 29 through 34, and Genesis 27, 5 through 29, Jacob steals his brother's birthright and his blessing. Now, why is that important? What do we need to know? Why does he do that? By
It's
the way,
all about the Benjamins.
Okay, why is it about the Benjamins for Yaakov?
Well, again, we have to kind of our house, their house thing. The birthright. Esau's brother was the older brother. The eldest son always got a double portion of inheritance. So it's all about the Benjamins. He steals his older brother's birthright, so now he gets the double portion. And then the blessing on top of that is basically a prosperity thing as well. Jacob gets the prosperity that Isaac had intended for Esau, and basically instead makes Esau his younger brother's servant. So it's all about the Benjamins.
Okay. Why does Jacob do this?
His mommy told him to.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Who said that? Who said his mommy told him to?
That's me,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, she did on the second one, the blessing portion. Absolutely.
Yeah.
She orchestrated it.
Right. Jacob wouldn't have known about these Benjamins, except that's what the Lord had spoken over his life before he was born. And so Jacob grew into his mom kind of thinking about this situation while Jacob and Esau were kids. Right? So let me ask about then the state of Mrs. Isaac and growing Jacob. Were they content in the Lord with the Lord having spoken over their but / Jacob's life?
Except for the fact that there was not enough Benjamins?
Is that rhetorical or is that a clarification question?
It's just a statement, a question, a joke. I mean, if there's a lack of contentment, it sounds like it's I want a little bit more.
Okay.
That's Jimmy want more.
Okay. Right. Right.
So and there's a lack of contentment because my brother, who's no count hunter, shouldn't get all this stuff. I want to get it instead, and I'm more deserving. Like Joe Namath says, get what you deserve. So anyway, I think there's when we feel like we're not getting what we deserve, there is a sense of lack of contentment. Back to Genesis 3. God's holding out on you. So all of a sudden, discontent is sown by the adversary.
Okay.
And that's maybe a lesson there.
And so we can jump from Genesis 3 to 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10 and understand, even in this circumstance where there's a thorn in the flesh that is given this gentleman because of his exceedingly great blessings from Yahweh God, that his rebuke of Jimmy want more is I am content in the midst of hardships, insecurities, insults, persecutions, weaknesses. The first two characters that we're looking at right now, Abraham and his wife, Jacob and his mom, do they have this philosophy of 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10?
No, and they were willing to deceive through the fur on the hands and other things. So they were willing to do a lot to get that blessing.
Yeah, thank you, Di. Part of our discussion, once we get on the train, because I think the train is still slowly in the station, but maybe it'll start moving pretty soon, is what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. We blow this over and we blow this off a lot and we just accept that, oh, we get this. But some of the passages we're looking at, some of these scenarios with these Bible figures that we're talking about right now, this is not an easy application. And hopefully that's what this is. What we're trying to do is to show you when we're dealing with folks who aren't even in the same kind of predicament that Paul is, their option is not to be content, is not to be joyful. It's Jimmy want more. And that's what we're seeing with Abraham and Sarai, or Abram and Sarai. And that's what we're seeing here with Jacob and his mom, is they're already wealthy, having inherited the better and the most part of what Abraham had.
Yeah, I always find the Jacob thing really funny because, the first part with the birthright is, he's your brother, you should love him, right? And, he's hungry for a sandwich. And so you give him a sandwich and you're like, in return, I want your birthright instead of just making him a sandwich because you love him.
Yeah. And Rebecca didn't trust God enough that the promise he made about the younger being served by the older, that was going to work without their manipulation. So, folks, we're not content to sit back and let Yahweh God or let Jesus work through us. We think we've got the better answer as to how to, as to the right when. We're not content to let the Lord lead and to let him be principal in our lives through weaknesses, hardships, insult, difficulties, etc. These two folks don't have it bad that we're taking a look at right now. They don't have these pressing hardships. They just want more, or they want now what it is that's been promised to them. So let me read these if I can, and then pause and see if this is making sense to you or if it's just confusing. So the deserved consequence in this situation is Jacob gets badly beaten or killed by his very angry brother. That's what he should have gotten. But what Yahweh does, the grace that Jacob gets out of this, is Jacob is blessed by Yahweh, makes peace with his brother, and inherits the birthright, the legacy of the firstborn, with the promise to Abraham, instead of getting killed by his brother. So let me pause. Any questions? Any people going, what train is it that is being conducted by you out of what station? Because I ain't got no idea what you're talking about.
It's, if it goes back to Romans 8:28, right, where basically God's going to take whatever the situation is and do it for his good. I'll paraphrase it, right?
Yep.
So are you trying to tell us that no matter what we necessarily do, what's going to come out of it is what God wants? And, right? So it's what he wants. No matter, we can't screw it up. We can, but God's going to still use it the way that he wants to use it. If you go back to where Abram and Sarai, Jacob and Rebecca and Esau, and, even further on down the road, there are plenty of other pieces where people said, like, I can do this better. And God lets it happen. Yes, he could have stopped it, but God lets it happen because he is going to still use it for his glory and his good. And it shows that his grace is all that we really and truly need. That's all I got.
Sarah/Sarai, that is a huge mouthful, because that's the position that Paul gets to, where he is content not to have to manipulate the circumstances so that he shines, that he rises, that he gets the credit. He's content that Jesus shines through the very fact that Paul can't. And we're not good at this.
No, but we have things now that they didn't have. They didn't have these written down in ways that was available to everybody, right? So they didn't have ways to learn, to see what happened here, and what can we learn from those. Whereas now we do, but the question is, what do we do with it? And how do we do the right thing with it?
You're challenging some of the tenets that we started talking about earlier today, which is we get a whole lot of information. We are deluged by information every day, if not every week. What do we do with that? And unfortunately, our culture today, we're not good learners and then good practitioners of the best that we learn. So you're right. We have many references that suggest the best way, and we still opt for what makes me shine the highest, shine the most.
Right. And that goes back to even where you talked about, going to be fed somewhere, right? You take what's thrown at you and you just take it, but you don't process it to figure out the good and the bad, because not everything that hits us every day is good stuff, right? And then how to process it. And you're right, we are not good learners anymore. We used to be, but we are not anymore because we don't want to take that time to figure it out because we are in too much of a hurry to get to the finish line, you know? So we don't take the time to stop for even just a minute and think about it before you either say, do, don't do, whatever it is. And we sometimes will pay for that, not taking a second.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for thought bubbling, that you bring to the party all the time. Thank you. I had the wonderful opportunities to check in with Sherry during the course of the week here. And if you guys are aware of Laverne's accident and recovery, and then the impending vacation that was on the awaiting the Howards, this week has been very, very trying for the Howard family and for Mom. And yet, one of the things when I checked in with Sherry that she said to me, and I was very excited by it, and she said, "I know all of this is happening, and all of this is challenging, and all of this is piling up, but I'm really working to be content through it." And folks, the message here with 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10 is, I know that Paul says it. I know we've heard sermons about it thousands, if not hundreds of times in our lives, but it's not easy. And what Sherry said is the fact that Paul says it and he says it with ease doesn't mean that we easily apply this concept to our lives. That contentment and joy is very difficult for us to aspire to because we really spend a lot of our lives as Americans, as Westerners, with the Jimmy want more attitude. And these first two characters that we've looked at, Abraham and Jacob, they're not in a position where they even need more. They're doing just fine. But God's not working on their behalf as fast as they'd like, kind of the way that Sarah said. And he's not working it out the way that they like. So they're not content to take a back seat in that. No, they're going to make it happen differently. And God's grace is what weighs out in both of these scenarios, because his justice would have meant not only the potential of smiting, but you get what you deserve, which would be Jacob getting killed by his brother or badly beaten, Abraham being limited to just one son, because Sarah was barren before then, and Sarah's now not going to permit him to visit any more of her handmaidens. So he gets one son out of the deal. But that's not what God's grace allowed. God's grace allowed for, indeed, Isaac to be born, and then God graciously also allowed him to have other children, even to get married a second time. And in Jacob's case, Jacob should have been beaten 7 ways to Sunday. But he and his brother reunite. He gets to be the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So let's move to this third guy and see how you feel, especially as we're moving toward the end of our time today. And I'm still trying to figure out where this train is and where the caboose is in the engine, but I'm trying to work with it. Joseph is a guy, I think, in your book. And in Genesis 37, 1 through 11, Joseph brags about his future greatness. Why does he do that?
Because he's been told his whole life he is.
By who? By his daddy. So Joseph acts on his dad telling him this, and he decides he's gonna talk about it. Who's he talk about it to? I think he had more than a cup of many colors, but thank you, Brother Gene.
I mean, he told his brothers and said, hey, guess what?
Yeah.
This is what you guys are going to do, so have a good time.
And not only this is what you're going to do, look at what I got that you don't got.
Mm-hmm.
So, what should Joseph have gotten? What was his just desserts that he should have gotten that he deserved for this bad boy?
Well, he got half of it, right?
Yeah.
When he got thrown into the pit. Okay.
Exactly.
So he kind of got the start of justice, kind of, sort of. But then you get Reuben, right? Reuben, coming and saying, hey, brothers, wait, we can't do this. Let's sell him instead. So he kind of almost got justice, but then God still uses it. You know, he at least got some, he got some payback from the brothers for what he did to them.
Yeah, he did get an attitude adjustment.
He did get an attitude adjustment. And, and then and the whole time in Egypt, he still has that whole attitude adjustment with various things going on, right? So he kind of does get a little bit of justice from his brothers, but God gives him the ultimate grace.
But then, I also think that I think we should cut Joseph a little slack here. Joseph was a kid. Abraham was an old man. I'm not really sure about, Jacob's age, but Joseph was a kid. Just a mouthy, know-it-all kid. I don't know.
Okay, no, I hear you. Look, in these first three situations, the parents, the adults, there are helping partners to help these folks be complicit in their behavior. Sarah didn't come up with the idea that helped Abraham along. Excuse me, she did come up with the idea. Abraham didn't come up with that by himself, because suggesting that he could have been killed himself by his wife. Jacob didn't know all the stuff that he knew, except that Rebekah told him that that's what was spoken over his life. That was the prophecy that was he was supposed to embrace. And kid Joseph didn't know about this, except his dad pretty much told him every day. So I thank Sarah for weighing in, saying, okay, he kind of got some of it. You guys are really nice, because I think a lot of times when you get what you deserve, you get this. See, because Joseph got thrown into the pit, but he didn't get badly beaten. Because, excuse me, if I'm one of the brothers listening to you and you're a punk, I gotta beat you up a little bit. So they threw him into the pit, but they hadn't really beaten him up. And being killed by his very angry brothers, okay, well, that's what they had planned. So you're right. Reuben comes up with the idea, well, let's just get him out of town. An interesting way. So what he deserved was to get beaten / to get killed. And yes, I'll go with Ellen. He was just a kid. But look, not a lesson for today, but all of those three patriarchs, including Joseph, had some issues with I do it my way, or favoritism that creates some weirdness to the third generation. And you could almost say Joseph is the third generation. So the stuff that was Abraham's problem filters down to good old Joseph. Picking a favorite. Okay? But that's not the lesson here. This is kind of what did they deserve, and what did God's grace allow them to experience? So what he deserved was get badly beaten or to be killed. What he gets is kind of what Sarah hinted at, is he's made great after about 13 years. He rises to the number 2 position in Egypt, saving his family and Egypt in the process. And that's Romans 8:28/29. And I like that Gene paraphrases, that's God is not surprised by the junk we do. And if we think about that and we try to meditate on this 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, well, then the idea is to just work on what Sherry was working on this week. Being content, being joyful in the midst of it going on, or in the midst of you thinking, Jimmy, want more, is a really difficult practice. But indeed, it is a practice. So let me throw out one more for this week, and then I'll quiet down after we comment on this a little bit, because maybe you've got the flavor. Because we've got a few more for next week to help us really get comfortable watching principles of the Bible being promised by God, their hand on his hand on their lives, saying, this is what's going to happen. And I'm going, yeah, but I think, yeah, but it could be better if. That's where we are. And that's what Paul, when we take a look at him, Paul is the opposite of that. Paul goes, coulda, woulda, shoulda, for me, I need to throw out the window. I'm going to be content in my weakness. I'm going to be content in my insults. I'm going to be content in my hardships, in my persecution, that still, because Jesus shines the most mightily through me, I'm okay to take a back seat, if not to sit in the seat of the Woody facing backwards.
Before you go on to the fourth one.
There you go. There you go, old people. Thank you for smiling about that. Yes, brother Redshirt.
Right. One of the other principles that come to mind, and this may derail something, and if so, I'm not even going to apologize, because when it comes down to Joseph, God's hand was so on his life that in spite of everyone trying to put him down and eliminate him and cause him to be some kind of failure, or also ran, every opportunity for that becomes a blessing for him. And not only does he exceed all of expectation, the dreams come true, and he does become literally ruler of Egypt, in spite of what he ruled Egypt as opposed to Pharaoh. And so it's like, when we walk with God, the enemy or enemies on the planet, really everything that they try to do to us, God will turn around. And that's just something I saw.
Okay, so you know what? We won't go to the fourth guy, because I think we need to end on this third guy. But let's talk about that since you brought it up. Look, folks, I'm not telling you that God didn't have his hand on Joseph. That's why in the beginning of us talking today, I talked about us appreciating in the midst of walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I didn't say it that way. Appreciating the journey as opposed to just the destination, right? Because it's very easy to look back and go, oh, God's hand was on me. And that's kind of, in some ways, Gene, what you're doing right now is when we look back at what Joseph's journey was, that we recognize that God's hand was there the entire time. But the emphasis on Joseph here also lends itself to understanding what Paul's talking about in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. Look, that God's hand was on this, that God's grace was following Joseph, doesn't mean that Joseph didn't hate being separated from his father and his family, that he had to learn a whole new language, that going from the favored son to now a slave in Egypt, that was not a good thing, that he becomes the head of his master's household because he's such a good servant and God's grace is on him. And then Potiphar's wife decides to make a play for him. That play then makes him have to make an odd decision that he's going to lose either way he chooses, unless he just kills himself or runs away. Even running away could have its consequence. He gets thrown in prison. Prison's not good. And then even when we lead up to this, he's in prison. He's in with a couple of guys, one who's got a good outcome and one not so good. And he's confident because God being with him allows for a positive outcome for one of the guys. He's confident that he's going to get out of jail. And then I think, my buddy said it's 3 years. I think it's 2 years later, he's still in prison. So Brother Gene, you're not wrong at all by saying that God's grace resided on Joseph the entirety of the time. But Joseph was not necessarily, no, let me not do that, because we might say, well, Joseph was content. Yeah, maybe Joseph was, but we wouldn't be. We wouldn't be content, ripped from our household as kids, away from our family, and learning a new language, and then being a servant when you were destined to be the number one son. And then being accused of a crime that you didn't commit, and then landing in prison, and then believing that you're going to get a pardon from prison, and then still lingering for another couple of years. Folks, all of those are persecutions, difficulties, hardships, insults, and weaknesses. All of those are that Joseph experienced. And because Joseph went through it, and we can look back and go, yes, God's grace, folks, we're trying to apply this to our lives. And Paul seems to say that he successfully understands where that is. I don't know that we do. So that's the end of my lecture series for the day. Your comments, your commentary as we wrap up today.
Well, they are roadmaps to how God is working on us through those situations that he allows us to be put in, or if Joseph hadn't gone through those things, would he have learned to trust the Lord like he did? And the same for us. The more we go through these hard times, the more we learn he is there and there is a plan. And even when it stinks to high heaven, when we're in the middle of it, at the end of it, we start to slowly see why we had to go through it and what we learned from it. We may never like what we had to go through, but we understand why we had to do it.
So I'm going to put out a term before we wind down, and maybe it'll create an additional thought or two before we close. Because Di, I understand what you've just presented. In fact, I understand that better than going through it and going, oh joy, count it all joy. Oh, it's great. Today's a great day. I understand better the retrospect and the hindsight of going, oh, that's what the Lord was taking me through. That's what it was that he was teaching me when I come out of it. But in the midst of it, it's a bear. And so I present to you folks, especially with the lesson we've been learning about grace in action, grace displayed, anything he can do, I can do better. And then taking a look at this passage in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, where Paul says, I'm content. I'm content to rest in the fact that he is first and I'm not. And so when I experience difficulties, hardships, weaknesses, insults, I can handle all of that, because when he's strong, I'm weak, and I'm okay with that. Folks, I've been beleaguered in my life by unfortunately a group or a kind of person that I kind of refer to as a church or a Christian complainer. And I hear folks regularly, their life is, oh, whoa, oh, it's just so difficult. Oh, I can't handle it all the time. And my question is, why aren't you content? Why aren't you joyful if you understand that there's more to the circumstances of today? You understand that today is a blip in the in contrast to eternity. Why are you so weighed down by the circumstances of right now? And every time it's woe is me. This is so difficult. I don't know what to do with this. How does that beleaguer us if we understand grace and supposedly being content in such things because we're satisfied that he will never leave or forsake us? So, question out there, your comment, your response.
I wasn't going to say this because I thought it was probably off the topic, but since you asked the question, it kind of brings it back in. A lot of the Old Testament accounts of our heroes, not all, but a lot of them have happy endings. What's interesting, and I'm preaching on John the Baptist today. My sermon is called "Make Jesus Famous," and it's just, he had a role, and his role came to an end. and his life came to a much less interesting end. But if you look at the Old Testament and kind of the major players, and of course you've got somebody like a Jeremiah, the prophets, it gets a little more sketchy with the prophets, but there's a lot of happy endings there, or middle of the road endings maybe. But a lot of people in the New Testament, including our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, humanly had some tough endings. I mean, certainly Jesus was resurrected, but his road ended at the cross. And you look at the first disciples, and I mean, it's a pretty tough list. I mean, Fox's Book of Martyrs exists for a reason. And I think we sometimes can get lulled into this idea that, and people misuse Romans 8:28 to say, well, there's going to be a happy ending. It's not always a happy ending. And we need to be content with that reality as well. And I just think that right around the corner, myself included, there's going to be a brighter day right around the corner if I can just hang on. And it may not be. But the people have been conditioned to think that, well, I belong to Jesus, I belong to God, so all things are going to work out for my good. Not necessarily.
Other thoughts as we wind down. Thank you, by the way, for that, Pastor Bruce, because it's rightly related. In fact, we're trying to kind of meld the Old and the New Testaments to help us understand. Paul did what Sarah suggested, is Paul's learned from all the writings and all the stuff that went before. And then when he had Jesus kind of codify and went, all of that is about me, Paul went, okay, I get it. I get it. Just because he doesn't mean we do. So other thoughts, and my warning, if no thoughts, no commentary, we're going to get on this same train next week. Now, hopefully, we'll start it out with our Jesus encounters. So please, folks, do what you can to have a Jesus encounter. And then we may take a look at this technology that Sarah will help me with, and we'll see if that will work. And then we're going to get on this train again next week. And we're going to start, I'll tell you right now, we're going to start the train with Moses. Okay, so we're going to get on this train with Moses for next week. And what we're trying to do is to take a look at this contentment and this joy. And I like that Bruce says that he's talking about this week, make Jesus famous. Because guys, that's really in essence what Paul is saying in 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, is that by Paul decreasing, Jesus increasing, the spotlight's on Jesus. When Paul gets it right. When Paul gets it wrong, Paul takes the blame. That's not an easy thing for us to do. And Diane, thank you for your commentary that you put in the chat. You're right, is that sometimes we have to go through stuff, and Pastor Bruce put his finger right on this terrifically, because the misinterpretation and misunderstanding of Romans 8:28 is all things work together for those who love the Lord for my good. If you watch that show, Manifest, that was the guiding principle for that show Manifest a few years back. That was the mom's favorite verse. And I used to watch it, and it was misapplied because there was no Jesus, no faith orientation to it. It was all things work for good. And if we take that the way that we like it best, work for my good. And that's the misunderstanding of what our duties and what the natural evolution of us doing our Christian job with the Great Commission. We think it's going to work for our good, and it's not necessarily. It's going to work for his good. Our good is that this life is a blip. And that's why we need to hang on to that. We're praying people equipped by Jesus to impact this world for the good time, for the next one. That's the one I'm looking forward to. So this is a good time. But the next one, we're promised that that's going to be knock your socks off all the time. All right, so let's pray. Thank you, folks, for indulging. Thank you for hanging out in your all over the country where you are. Please be purposeful and going out and meeting folks and making Jesus famous. I think that is a real key title for a sermon. That's great. So you've already heard Bruce allude to that. If you go to YouTube and pull up Kona Coast Fellowship, or as I like to say for short, KFC. So you can make it easy that way, and then you will see Bruce deliver this message. Now, please don't pull up KFC because you will see the Colonel, and that's not who you really want to see. But that's my funny way of remembering it. So let's pray.